Welcome back to Kuma English Listening Hub. Today, we're stepping into a very British habit. Walking down an ordinary street, glancing up, and suddenly discovering that an unassuming house once held a poet, a scientist, a political agitator, or someone whose name you've never heard yet somehow seems important the moment it's framed in a neat circle of blue. We're talking about blue plaques, those discreet signs that turn brickwork into biography. They're so familiar in London that you can barely look at a terrace without bumping into one, yet the system behind them is far from obvious. Who decides which lives deserve a permanent shout-out on a wall? What counts as significant? And how do you commemorate a person whose legacy is, let's say, complicated? At first glance, it's a charming bit of local color, like village fates or queuing without complaint. But look closer, and you'll find a mini-drama of history, politics, taste, and the eternal British preference for understatement. A plaque doesn't give you a statue with a heroic pose. It gives you a sentence, maybe two, and expects you to do the rest. It's quite a thing, really. A national memory practice that is both public and quietly editorial. The idea is older than most people assume. The earliest commemorative markers in Britain weren't blue at all, and they weren't standardized. In the 19th century, learned societies and reform-minded Victorians began attaching tablets to buildings to signal that something happened here, or someone notable lived here. Think of it as the historical equivalent of pinning. A note to the fridge. Only the fridge is a Georgian townhouse, and the note is meant to last a century. London's most famous scheme eventually fell under what is now English heritage. Other cities run their own versions, sometimes with different colors, rules, and priorities. So when people say a blue plaque, they often mean the concept rather than a single central authority. Fair enough, because the effect is similar. The street becomes a kind of open-air index of the past. Now, here's the bit that surprises many learners of English, and frankly, many Brits too. You don't simply apply and get one. A plaque is not a participation trophy. The process is selective, and intentionally so, because the plaque is supposed to signal enduring significance rather than current popularity. Typically, nominations come from the public. That means anyone can be keen on a figure, do a bit of research, and send in a proposal. But a nomination is only the start, and it's at this stage that Britain's obsession with committees comes into its own. Historians, curators, and experts weigh the evidence, debate the contribution, and check whether the candidate meets the criteria. One major criterion is time. In the London scheme, the person must have been dead for at least 20 years, or have been dead for a century, whichever comes first. The logic is that time acts as a filter. It lets the dust settle, allows reputations to mature, and reduces the chance that today's celebrity becomes tomorrow's embarrassment. It doesn't eliminate risk, obviously. History has a nasty habit of reappraising people once new evidence appears. But the 20-year rule is meant to keep things, if not foolproof, then at least less impulsive. Another criterion is place. The building has to be the actual site where the person lived or worked, and it has to have survived in something like recognizable form. If the house has been rebuilt, gutted, or turned into luxury flats with no trace of the original, then you've got a problem. The plaque is attached to a physical anchor, a real wall, a real doorway, a real neighborhood. In a country where so much is built on layers, that material connection matters. And then there's significance. This is where it gets deliciously thorny. What does significant mean? It could mean a Nobel Prize, a groundbreaking novel, a political movement, a scientific discovery. But it might also mean being a first. The first woman in a certain profession, the first person of Caribbean heritage to hold an office, the first openly gay figure to reach a particular level of public influence. The scheme isn't merely about fame. It's about shaping a narrative of what Britain has been. Yet, significance is not purely objective. It's a judgment call, and judgment calls are shaped by the era. In the early decades, plaques tended to commemorate what you might call the classic great men of history. Statesmen, poets, bishops, military leaders. Over time, the range expanded. More women, more artists in non-traditional forms, more activists, more people whose influence was cultural rather than institutional. If you listen closely to these choices, you can hear Britain talking to itself about what it values. A plaque is a form of national conversation conducted in ceramic and mortar. Still, even with expanded criteria, there's the awkward matter of who gets left out. People often assume the absence of a plaque means the person wasn't important. Not necessarily. Sometimes the building no longer exists. Sometimes the person lived in too many places to make one site meaningful. Sometimes there's a shortage of evidence. You might have letters hinting at an address, but not enough to be spot on. And sometimes, if we're being honest, it's simply that commemoration reflects power. If your community had less access to property, less stability, fewer records, fewer champions in high places, you're less likely to have a neat documentable here-lived story. That's one reason modern schemes try to correct for historic imbalance, though it's a slow process, and it can feel like turning a tanker with a teaspoon. Let's talk aesthetics for a moment, because even design is a kind of ideology. The plaque's restraint is very British. Minimal text, no melodrama, no trumpet fanfare. Just a name, dates, and a line about what they did. It's almost comically modest. Imagine reducing a life of astonishing work to 8 words, then asking passers-by to care. And yet people do care, because the plaque invites curiosity. It doesn't give you the whole story, it gives you the itch to look it up. There's also something wonderfully democratic about the experience. You don't need an entrance ticket. You don't have to know the right people. You can simply wander about, especially in parts of London like Bloomsbury, Kensington, or Hampstead, and bump into history while you're on your way to buy a sandwich. It makes the city feel layered. The modern traffic, the cafes, the cyclists, and then, above it all, a quiet reminder that a composer once listened to the same rain. But of course, plaques can spark rows. Britain loves a polite argument, and when it comes to memory, politeness sometimes goes out the window. One controversy is whether commemoration equals endorsement. Suppose a person made major contributions, yet also held views that are now rightly considered abhorrent. Do you still mark their home? Do you add context? Do you remove it? There's no universally satisfying answer. Some argue that a plaque is merely a historical marker. It states that the person lived there, not that we approve of them. Others respond that public honor is never neutral. A plaque is, in effect, a form of praise, however understated. The compromise, in some cases, is interpretation. Museums have labels and audio guides. Streets have not much. A small circle of ceramic is not built for nuance. You can't fit a whole debate into one sentence without it sounding like a legal disclaimer. Yet, people increasingly expect context. The public is more historically literate, and also more alert to how commemorations can reinforce exclusion. So institutions face an interesting dilemma. Keep the plaque as is and you may seem complacent. Remove it, and you may appear to be erasing history. Add a second plaque, and you may look like you're trying to have it both ways. Whatever you do, someone will say, "Blimey, you've made a right mess of it." Another row concerns location and money. Buildings with plaques can become minor tourist stops, which can affect property values and local footfall. In some areas, that's welcomed. In others, residents aren't keen on strangers taking photos outside their bedroom window. There's something slightly surreal about living in a normal flat, while visitors whisper about the novelist who used to live behind your curtains. Then there's the practical side. Who pays? Plaques cost money to research, produce, and install. Schemes often rely on charitable funds, sponsorship, or local government budgets. And as budgets tighten, so does the number of plaques. It's a reminder that memory, too, has operating costs. What I find especially interesting is how blue plaques interact with Britain's class system and housing history. If commemoration depends on buildings, and buildings depend on who could afford to live somewhere stable, you end up with a map of remembrance that can tilt towards the affluent. Not always, but often. It's easier to commemorate someone who lived in a house that survived, in an area that wasn't bombed, redeveloped, or neglected. Yet plaques can also puncture that bias. When a plaque appears on a council estate or in an unfashionable street, it quietly says, history didn't only happen in drawing rooms. It happened in rented rooms, in crowded terraces, in places where people were knackered from work and still managed to write, organize, invent, or care for a community. If you want a genuinely British weekend activity, try plaque spotting. It's like bird watching, but the birds are dead and the binoculars are optional. You'll start noticing patterns. Writers cluster in certain neighborhoods. Scientists pop up near universities and hospitals. Actors are everywhere because theaters draw people in, and, like moths to a flame, performers tend to live near where they can get work. And you'll also notice what plaques don't tell you. They rarely mention the messy parts, the poverty before success, the scandal, the heartbreak, the compromises. The plaque is a neat headline, not the article. That's why, if you're using this for listening practice, it's a brilliant prompt for imagination. Take a plaque as a starting point and ask, what did daily life look like here? What did the street smell like? What did they eat? Who did they argue with? Which bus did they miss? There's a linguistic pleasure in plaques, too. British commemorative language has its own register: formal, compressed, faintly old-fashioned. You'll see verbs like lived, worked, was born, died, wrote, composed, pioneered. Occasionally, you'll get a phrase like champion of or campaigner for, which hints at struggle without spelling it out. If you're aiming for C2 level, pay attention to how much meaning is packed into so little. That's advanced comprehension, inferring from minimal data, reading tone, sensing what's implied. It's the same skill you need for editorials, academic abstracts, or those politely savage British emails that say, with respect, and mean the opposite. So, what do blue plaques actually do? They do at least 3 things at once. First, they teach. Not in a classroom way, but in an ambient way. They place names in your path and let curiosity do the rest. Second, they legitimize. They tell you, quietly but firmly, that this person matters enough to be remembered in public space. Third, they shape identity. The cumulative effect is a portrait of Britain. Its literature, its science, its politics, its entertainment, its reform movements, and its contradictions. And perhaps the most British thing about them is their tone. They don't shout. They don't demand attention. They simply sit there, rain or shine, waiting for someone to look up. Next time you're in Britain, or even just watching a film set in London, keep an eye on the walls. If you spot a blue plaque, pause and read it. Imagine the life behind the name. And if you ever feel that history is grand and distant, remember, sometimes it's just a person in a room, doing their work, utterly unaware that one day a little blue circle will announce them to strangers. Right, that's us sorted for today. If you enjoyed this, save the episode and have another listen, focusing on the idioms and the inferred meaning. Cheers for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.